do we know from the people who are using services in our city about what's working, what's not working, what could be better? There are also opportunities to identify, things like gaps in capacity. How do what kinds of new tools do service providers need to better serve clients? What kinds of new and promising approaches are out there? There's a lot of discussion, for example, around Housing First for Youth as a model. And then how to make decisions about how to use the funds that are available to communities. So in addition to federal funding, communities also receive funding from provincial governments. They receive often funding from municipalities, as well as sometimes from philanthropic sources, so charitable organizations and things like that. And as part of that community planning process, it's also hoped that communities track their progress. So for example, a lot of community plans will include specific targets to reduce homelessness or to prevent people who are experiencing homelessness from becoming homeless. So the idea would be to track progress towards specific targets that are, again, locally defined, and to then report back to not just HPS, but usually to other funders about how we're doing and where some of the successes are and where things still need to improve. So, So we're very eager to hear ideas today from you about how communities can more effectively integrate youth first voice into all of those aspects of community planning. It's really interesting right now across Canada. There's such a strong and powerful interest in lived experience and the importance, like the really rich importance of it feeding into local planning processes. And also in this case, specifically youth first voice. So we've developed a set of questions in consultation with the Youth Planning Committee as part of this conference. So we're going to break into 4 tables and discuss different ways of sort of tackling this question of how can communities more effectively engage with youth and use that input. It's one thing to consult and engage, it's quite another thing to mobilize and implement that knowledge and to use it to more effectively do what we're trying to do. So with that, I will turn it over to David.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm David French. I'm with Away Home Canada. And you've all said things that I was going to say. So, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie it all into a little ball for us. In that, I'll confess, I was a bureaucrat, and I'm in recovery. I'm in recovery. It's not a bad thing, but I was one of those people who thought I really understood youth engagement and how to put young people first. But I was also that guy who sat at his desk and cobbled together something and thought, man, youth are going to love this when I give it to them, instead of working with young people to design it. So I've been at both ends of it, and I think congratulations to HPS to introduce this conversation, because we loved as bureaucrats to get solutions in front of us versus more problems. And so what you guys are going to be able to provide are some of these solutions that communities continue to come to Away Home with and to HPS with around how do we engage young people? How do we embed them in our planning processes? And how do we ensure that their voices are represented? We've done a really good job of better understanding the needs of young people. We've done a poor job of listening to young people throughout the design, the refinement, and the execution of policy and community policy. And so this is an opportunity for us to really listen and for us to take that next step towards inserting youth voices within planning processes and communities. But I'll take it a step further. HPS is what would you call it, embroiled in the renewal of the HPS strategy. Is that fair?
Sure.
Embroiled, immersed. They're knee-deep in it, and we're reaching the final stages of it. And so this is another opportunity for us to ensure that young people can be engaged in that new thinking, in new policy. And so I take these questions as what they are, and if there are things that aren't in these questions that you feel really strongly about, say them. We want to ensure that you leave today feeling like you've been heard, you've been understood, and that there's people here who want to move your voices forward. And so I'll leave it at that. Do you guys take over now?
Well, basically, we just need to get everyone into 4 groups based on the topics. Is it 2 or 4?
Yeah, we're
it's 2 now.
amalgamating. Yeah,
Okay.
topic 1 and topic 4 and 2 and 3.
Okay.
Okay, so 2 groups.
Yeah.
So 1 and 4, 2 and 3. So,
And thank you guys, by the way. Sorry. Thank you.
Oh, we just want to just make it organized, I guess, as organized as it can be in this kind of space. So basically, if you're interested in topics 1 or 4, go to this side of the room. If you're interested in 2 and 3, go to this side. You don't have to stay with these topics. If you're not feeling it, you can switch over. We'll try and get in circles, do our best. So,
1 and 2.
yeah, we'll move
3 and 4, or 1 and 2, 3 and 4.
Every time I move.
Okay, so Holly, do you want to raise your hand? 1 and 4 over where Holly is. She's raising her hand. And questions 2 and 3 are going to be over here by Rosie.
Where am I? Because I was 1, so I think so am I 1 and 4?
I don't think we're gonna say anything, man.
Yeah.
We can just check. I just want to say thank you to everyone.
Huh?
I just want to say thank you to everyone for participating.
I don't know that.
I just want to talk.
No, so at the end we're going to come together.
Can I just say thank you everyone for participating? Can I just say that?
Yeah, at the end we'll come back up and speak.
Okay.
Just pick a side. Those are the topics. But mostly it's just going to be like topical.
I was trying to get it, but then it was watching it. Okay. Oh, I left mine on the stage. No, I couldn't even help it. I wrote it. No, I did not see the Frank thing whatsoever. Yeah, so the topics are barriers and challenges and opportunities related to engagement. Do you want to say yours? Okay, sure, yeah. We'll start with 1 and 2. Oh, we're 1? Yeah. Ah, I looked at the numbers. I'm supposed to be over there. Okay, bye.
Anyway, that's barrier. So, you define priorities and outcomes for you. What are some priorities for youth experiencing homelessness in your community?
experience looking for. You know, voices of young people with lived experience of homelessness. So I'm kind of curious to see how many of us are here. Okay. So the first topic is youth defining priorities and outcomes for youth. What are some of the key priorities for youth experiencing or at risk of homelessness in your community? Well, as far as I understand the question, we're trying to identify like key priorities, what's not going correctly, you know, what's urgent, what needs to be solved like yesterday in your communities in relation with youth homelessness. Trick question. Absolutely. That would have been nice. Do you specifically have any idea, like, you know, what kind of housing do you want to build on that idea for who? C'est pas du côté montréalais, y a-t-il des priorités particulières? Okay, so there are a lot of resources for youth. However, at nighttime there are some restrictions. Some services can only be accessed during the day. And you can like take a break before reaccessing the service to give people a chance to grow. Otherwise, they hire organizations for food, for clothing. There's really everything in the daytime. Okay, so downtown's really a place that, you know, helps a lot. Est-ce que tu dirais que c'est comme différent ou pour les jeunes qui sont en situation rurale ou je sais pas, comme tu connais-tu bien des jeunes qui arrivent dans le nord de la ville pour justement accéder à ces services-là?
Personnellement, non. Mais j'ai entendu souvent les jeunes dire que Montréal, c'était une place qu'ils se sont fait conseiller à venir, justement parce qu'il y avait les ressources et l'aide adéquate.
So similar to what we were experiencing here, Jesse, and, you know, in Montreal, right, it's like the services are downtown and people in the peripheries are, you know, suggestions are made that they go downtown to receive services. So there's a similar migration to what you see here. Does anyone else, like whether you're a young person with lived experience or speaking for and about the experiences of young people that you know, anyone else have anything to define as a like raging priority?
Like what she was saying, she should like I'm from Newfoundland, so like when I was going through my battle with like depression and anxiety and like whatever else was going on, I had to move from my hometown. My hometown only has 200 people. And I don't go home because I'm known as that suicidal depressed kid that's only doing these for attention. And because like all the stuff going on in my mind like kept showing up in my head. So I can't go home, I just don't like going home. And it sucks with like St. John's is not a big spot, but I had to make a whole new life in capital city of Newfoundland because all I needed some help with like my depression and shit. Like I had to go to a treatment center. I had to wait like 4 or 5 months in the hospital because I had nowhere to go. So I was homeless. Well, I wasn't homeless. It was like I had this place over my head. I had 3 square meals a day, but like couldn't eat. But I left the hospital phone. I would go back to the hospital. So like they kind of do stuff, and then when you're in hospital, they don't do nothing for your mental health. You have to go to a treatment center. I saw my psychologist once in the last 3 years. I gave up my pills, but they should still check in with that. So like, if the people like people care, but there's not enough money and resources to bring services
focus in the community of, sorry, on the population of youth homeless.
Yeah, like I don't go home because I know if I go to my buddy's house that I grow up with, there's parents who ask me the same three questions all the home. I've been home 3 homes in the last 3 years because of the same three questions. How are you doing? Have you been in hospital yet? Or are you working? I know I haven't been in hospital the last 3 years. So can you please stop asking? And they don't understand, right? Your mental health, your drug addiction, or whatever's going on.
And we'll move on to second question that will prompt other types of responses. On what issues would homelessness or at-risk youth want to be, or at-risk youth want to be engaged in a community planning process? So we're looking for, I guess, the categories of work or thinking that young people would like to be engaged in as a part of the community planning process. Yes.
I'd say engaging youth in more meetings with service providers, you know, like different providers in different communities or provinces. When they gather, it's like, it's just okay, so like, how can we make this better? But you're not asking, I didn't take this, but somebody said, you can't do for us without us, you know? Or something like that.
Nothing about us without us.
Yeah, nothing about us without us. And I feel like that, like, going around with system providers telling them, hey, let me tell you why this isn't working, you know? Because you can't just ask yourself that it makes sense. I feel like that's another way to engage you.
Okay, for sure. So service delivery is definitely one area that youth can engage in more. Anybody else has ideas?
Even if like you like if it's like say if it's conference for example, like there's online groups there with like under 200 people and there's probably 50 professionals, but why is there not more youth in panels? Like it's great and stuff, you got a social work degree, deadly, great. But if you've never been through it, book smarts is always so much. If you've never been through a lot of stuff, you're not like you only take the smarts from the books while you run at whatever universities are here. Your social work degree, but haven't lived through the stuff, you should honestly need some more professionals with lived experience in this field because they know it from a first-hand experience and they know it from a professional experience. You know, like
So what I'm hearing in particular, it's not only the like professional, you know, the professional side is going to include young people with lived experience in their system. It's like young people with lived experience are going to integrate and kind of change the narrative of that
yeah,
professional place.
like there should be like a way to like I'm terribly dyslexic, so school is not. But there should be a training program that if I wanted to go to school, like all I like to do is try and care. That's what I like to do. I would love to work at Choice 3. That's where I get my support now. But have not happened. To be honest. But I would love to have a like, training program to get my experience and like people work with me so I would not have to go back to school. So I can integrate
Hello?
Yeah, it is. You can take it off.
Were
there,
they
too, if you wanna
listening to
hold it.
you?
You want to hold it?
Did they hear what you said to me? Okay. I guess I'll wait for everyone to sit down.
Ask them to sit down.
They're messing around with chairs. It's chill.
We only have 10 minutes, so if you can just like sit down and listen for 10 minutes.
Okay. So, everybody paying attention enough? You confident? You can hear me? Any crowd feedback? Yeah, so it was a pretty good discussion. A lot of a diverse set of voices were heard. I just I want to reiterate something I said earlier, is that a lot of times when we come together, the voices of youth are kind of marginalized, and even in this room, I kind of felt it. I kind of felt like people were coming and they're social workers and they're talking about, oh, we did this, it worked so well, and literally we're just finished saying about how you need to not do that. So yeah, kind of weird. A little weird stuff. But yeah, I don't know, what am I supposed to say besides that?
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah,
there was
all right.
youth that wanted to speak, right? So let's open it up just for youth. No staff service providers. Just any youth who want to get up here and say something to the federal government, please come up and do so.
Even if you aged out, Op Ivy shirt, looking at you. I know you had stuff to say. Not anymore? Okay.
Nick, you don't have anything? Yeah, you don't want to come up?
Just do.
Yeah,
Yeah. And your name?
Nick.
Okay.
Do I have to
Okay,
go up there? I don't want to go up there. I go up there.
Too? Yeah, I don't know. I was running to you. It's all good. Everybody can have
Can I have some emotional support or what?
Take a seat. We'll have a panel. It's all good. Take it over. We got coffee. It's nice.
I mean, is there questions going to be asked here, or
I don't know. What do you got to say?
calling me up here?
What have you always wanted to say? It's an audio purpose.
So it's to the government, right?
Yeah,
To the
if you have
government,
one message to the
I don't
federal
know.
government about youth homelessness, what is it?
For youth homelessness. Okay. Well, if I had one message to the federal government, there should be more money put into anything that can help youth homelessness. Anybody can please make more shelters, please make more transitional living. I don't know, just put more, don't if there's a budget coming out, don't take money out of the things that can help youth homelessness. Stop.
So you're doing good. Go.
Yeah, put more money into resources that helps homeless youth. You got something to say?
Yeah, come on.
No.
Just come sit down. Whatever. If you want to go next, just take a chair. We'll pass the mic.
Can I say my?
Yeah. Woo.
The only thing I want to say is
You guys want to? It's up to you guys.
All right, I'm going to start us off with some announcements. Welcome to the second afternoon. Our numbers are dwindling, which always happens in conferences. I'm sure we'll be full again tomorrow morning. How's everyone's day been today? Awesome. Excellent. I also had an awesome day. It's a pretty exciting conference. I'm pretty pleased with how it's all worked out. A few announcements before we go to our closing plenary for the day. I wanted to remind you, encourage you, cajole you to attend the musical showcase this evening. It's going to be amazing. It's at a club called Mavericks, which is an easy walk in that direction on Rideau Street. I think the address is 221 Rideau Street, but it's in your program under the lunchtime and evening activities. And the musical showcase, it's an initiative of our youth team, and it's all youth with lived experiences of homelessness or at risk of homelessness who are performing. There's going to be, I think, musicians, definitely musicians, I think also poets, spoken word, performers, and there's going to be an open stage component. So if you'd like to come, if you just decide you want to get up on the spur of the moment, we're going to have a couple of guitars there. You don't have to have brought your own guitar. I don't think we'll have any other instruments. I could bring my flute, but we'll stick with the guitar. And or if you want to tell a story or share a poem or whatever, we'd really encourage folks to do that. And even if you just want to come and watch, that's super important too. We need an audience, and it would be really great to show up, support the young people, support the youth team. So that is happening. It's the doors will open at 7. The show will start at 8. So show up by 8 at Mavericks. And I wanted to just give people a little bit more textured detail about the memorial spirit flags, which if I'm sure you've noticed, they're going up on the windows, and they're really beautiful, and people are taking time to create them or just offer names, and then our team creates them. And another piece of the design that was developed by Aya, who's up here, as well as Kath Edwards, who's not around, but a member of our planning team, was to include like, if you remember from my childhood, I think from lots of childhoods, friendship pins, little pins with beads on them. And so on each spirit flag are 2, right, Aya? Two friendship pins or more? 2. And the idea is that if you're moved by a story, or if it was someone you knew, that you can take the friendship pin and wear it. And that is a way of taking that memory with you and taking it out into the world. And so it's a little bit of symbolism that's integrated into the memorial spirit flags to help you interact with them in another way, if that seems like something you're moved to do. So that, just to explain that little piece, and as you're looking at the spirit flags, you could choose a pin and wear it. Also, since I get this microphone, I'm gonna do a little bit of shameless self-promotion. It's not even self-promotion so much as the youth team I worked with. You heard from Charlotte yesterday, and Tiffany this morning mentioned this research project that we worked on together. And Charlotte actually did the layout for it really beautifully, and had it ready, rushed to have it ready for the conference so we could launch it. And so we actually had it out on the registration desk this morning. Some of you may have picked up copies, and I'd encourage you to do so. It's called Building Bridges, hearing from, I can't remember the subtitle, but from First Nations, Inuit, Métis, LGBTQ, and newcomer youth experiences of homelessness in Ottawa. So to pick up a copy of the report, probably we're going to close up registration, but it'll be there again tomorrow. And to take a look at that, we will have it up on various websites soon. but at the moment it's fresh off the presses, and you could pick up the first paper copy. Okay, I think that's it for announcements, and now I'm really pleased to keep walking into this microphone. Turn the floor over to Katie Burkholder-Harris, who is going to moderate this closing plenary panel.
Hi, everyone. All right, so we get to talk today about something near and dear to my heart, meaningfully engaging youth. I think that's the heart of a lot of the work that's happening. And all of these four experts today will be speaking from their experience. But first, let's just kind of frame this a little bit. Young people who experience homelessness frequently experience social exclusion and have few opportunities to meaningfully participate in decisions which affect them or in the research about them. Barriers to their inclusion include structural conditions and processes rooted in power imbalances, stigma, stereotypes, and myths about homelessness, and the lack of resources. Based on their research and experience, panelists will share how those working with homeless youth can develop partnerships with young people who experience homelessness to better understand what social exclusion means and how inclusion can be facilitated and fostered in solutions to ending homelessness in ways that young people find meaningful. And I think what's exciting is certainly from other panel discussions today and workshops, there's a number of you who have done this in many, many different ways. So I'm looking forward to a really robust discussion, and we'll have each panelist present for a few minutes and then open it up to the audience and have a conversation about what that can look like. So let's start with Sheldon Pollitt. Sheldon was my pool partner last night, thank goodness, because I lost, but he did really well. So Sheldon has been the executive director of Choices for Youth since 2001. During his tenure, the organization has become a national leader and partner in identifying best practices in the design and delivery of services to youth. Sheldon is the former co-chair of the National Learning Community on Youth Homelessness, and he's a founding board member of Away Home Canada, a national coalition to end youth homelessness. He is also a member of the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness and a board member of Raising the Roof. Sheldon is the current chair of the Ministers' Advisory Committee on Mental Health and Addictions, vice chair of End Homelessness St. John's, and a member at the Centre for Social Enterprise Advisory Committee at Memorial University. Welcome, Sheldon.
Thank you.
Do you want to take this? Over there? All right.
I don't have a PowerPoint. I am having a liberated PowerPoint-free conference. I highly recommend it. I don't know if it works for you guys, but it sure works for me. I guess the topic of youth engagement, and I think the whole notion of engaging young people is not particularly new. Choice for Youth has been around for 27 years, and our original board documents included, youth membership on our board. What changed, and it changed everything, is the word Katie used, which is meaningfully engaging youth. When we add meaningfully, it changes everything about how we think about it, how we approach it, how we ask young people, well, what makes sense for them in terms of real engagement and their voices not being just noise in the room, but actually driving and being a part of the conversation in a legitimate way. So I think that's the defining difference. I've seen a great deal of progress in the last number of years. And I think for me, my turning point in St. John's, Newfoundland, I tell stories, so I apologize now if you don't like my stories. About 10 years ago, we held a Raising the Roof, actually, was part of a National Youth Homelessness Conference in St. John's, Newfoundland. Fantastic event. We had one of our young people, I don't mind saying her name publicly because she was very outspoken advocate, Jill Pittman. Brilliant young woman, had a lot of struggles in her life, but it wasn't for lack of her capacity and passion. She was doing interviews nationally in English and French, and I looked at her at one point and it hit me. I said, do me a favor, do not be a 30-year-old former at-risk young person. That cannot be what you get out of this, that we all kind of, benefit from your words, your experience, and your knowledge, and we leave you with, that's, who you used to be, and that's it. So it really began to define differently in terms of how we support, train, encourage, and then get the hell out of the way of brilliant young people who can actually use their voice in a way. But they can use it as training opportunities, they can use it as resume building opportunities, they can use it for their own benefit and contributing to a much needed conversation in this country. So that's Jill's story, and I think it really changed how we thought about, youth engagement meaningfully at an organizational level. I compare it to, and this example may not make a whole lot of sense to you folks, but it makes sense to me, so I'm going to tell it anyway, is in Newfoundland we have a traditional or accepted 30% no-show rate in the mental health and addiction system. So traditionally what happens is if you look at that, that's just the cost of doing business. 30% of the time, people don't show up for their addictions appointment. But when you think about who is most likely not to show up, the person you're most worried about, right? The problem is 30% of the time, we're not offering them services in the way that works for them. Youth engagement is the same. We keep trying to invite young people into models of engagement, boards, committees, consultation processes that are based on our world. Well, many of our young people don't live in our world. Maybe they'll get there at some point, but they live in a very different world based on a very different experience. Right? So the problem becomes we're offering them engagement opportunities that don't work for them. So the shift has to be in terms of meaningfully engaging young people, giving them the tools, the skills, and letting them create their own safe spaces to figure out how to help us figure out where we need to go with services, program design, advocacy, policy change, all of that stuff. I firmly and fundamentally believe it is our responsibility, right? Young people come to us, if they had the ability to just figure this stuff out on their own, they probably wouldn't need us in the first place. It is fundamentally our responsibility to design services and programs and engagement opportunities that reflect where they are, not just where we want them to be. What's possible as a result of all of that? I think as an organization, we've created what's called the Youth Leadership Council. We've got 2 of our members here attending the conference. I know they're very chatty, so they probably talk to each and every one of you at this point. We've got young people who recently spent, I think, time in Vancouver engaging in an LGBTQ2S forum and summit. Tremendous youth leadership. We've had young people go to national conferences for the last number of years. They do training sessions. The federal government asked us last year to pilot a youth-specific point-in-time account, and we just kind of turned it over to the Youth Leadership Council. They did the organizing. They did the script in terms of what that would look like for other young people, and our job is just to support them with the skills and opportunities to do it well. They've launched their own peer-to-peer research methods. They train physicians, they train the RNC, which is the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary Police Force. So all of a sudden, by unlocking a more meaningful way of engaging the young people, it's not a kind of a low bar scenario, well, okay, we're going to find a way to engage them so they kind of use their voice. It's use their voice in all kinds of ways that might as well dream big with this stuff in terms of I don't want to put limits on what is possible for young people if we go about this stuff the right way. Part of our commitment as an organization, as I started this story, and I'm going to clue up soon, is around, we actually at some point removed, like many organizations, the requirement to have a youth rep on our board. We didn't do it because we didn't believe it anymore. We did it because it wasn't working for the organization, and it sure as hell wasn't working in a meaningful way for young people. What we didn't remove from the organization's vision and mandate is trying to figure out a way to meaningfully engage young people. I'm pleased to say now, because of the Youth Leadership Council and other engagement opportunities with young people, we've changed the board engagement piece where there's now a requirement for the Youth Leadership Council to meet directly with our board of directors at least twice a year. The board looks forward to that, young people look forward to it, and it actually is a much more meaningful way to actually have youth inform the vision and direction of our organization. So thank you.
So next up, we have Erica Morton. You're like, is it me? Yes.
Oh, you're going?
Yeah, I'm doing a bill of PowerPoint.
Yeah, so you can come up and do this. But let me read your impressive qualifications first. So Erica is a social planner with the Social Planning Council. and Research Council of Hamilton, and her focus is on youth housing and homelessness issues in Hamilton. As a project coordinator with the Street Youth Planning Collaborative, Erica supports their efforts towards addressing and responding to the issues unique to street-involved and homeless youth. Connected to this demographic, Erica also oversees the Urban Arts Initiative, and we've actually gotten to, you're like, do I oversee the Urban Arts Initiative? We've gotten to work together a number of times on a few pieces, and it's been fantastic to work with you and also see the group of youth that you've been working with and meet them and see their expertise. So welcome. Yep. And I think that shouldn't be your best.
Can everyone hear me okay? I never know with these things. No? Louder? I have a little squad over here, so I'm going to look to them probably a lot if I keep looking over here, so I apologize. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all here. It's great to see some faces still here after a long day 2 of the conference. And it's very energizing to know that there's a lot of folks here interested, obviously, in maybe doing more youth engagement work in your organizations or starting some youth engagement work. So I feel very energized at this moment. And I will caution that, like, I'm up here just to talk about some of the work that I've been doing so far around youth engagement. But I'm, more excited to hear what other people are doing and to learn and, like, heavily borrow other folks' ideas. So I will offer that as well. And I also apologize if folks were in the session I presented on earlier. There's totally some like duplication of slides, so maybe you'll learn something different that you didn't hear when I was speaking this morning. So I'm coming here speaking to you in my role as a project coordinator with the Street Youth Planning Collaborative and telling you like one very important piece of the work of the Street Youth Planning Collaborative in Hamilton, Ontario. That's our logo. That's the first slide. Yay. So what is the Street Youth Planning Collaborative? So it's an initiative that's been around since about early 2000s, and it's a collaboration of different agencies coming together to prevent, reduce, and end youth homelessness. And so we have this kind of neat model that developed over the years, and it's a 3-pronged kind of model, but all operating under this sort of broad mission of creating a sort of coordinated system of supports for youth in Hamilton that are sort of at risk of homelessness or who are experiencing homelessness. And so this very fancy diagram, as I joke, that I know how to like overlap circles together to show that they're sort of interconnected, is the best way that I can show that to you. So the top sort of circle is our directors committee. So we have a committee of directors who are working in agencies that have some sort of a mandate to work with youth experiencing homelessness. And their role is sort of decision making, given that their roles are sort of, they have a lot of power and privilege in their roles. So that's kind of their role under the guise of the SYPC. The second committee in the purple circle there is the Frontline Advisory Committee, or the FLAC Committee, as they're sort of affectionately called. And they're sort of 2-pronged in their role. One is sort of informing on, youth trends, issues, gaps in services, just knowing the youth culture generally. And so their information flows to the Directors Committee, as directors are sometimes a little bit disconnected. No shade to anyone that's a director in the room. And then they're also, they create sort of a network amongst each other so that they feel connected and that they have a community that they're working within in terms of how they're supporting young people and get to know about different services and programs that they can refer youth to. We could not and would not do this work without our Youth Leaders Committee. And there's a rep here, so I'm going to encourage somebody, I won't out you, but I'm staring at you, so I'm kind of outing you right now. I'm sorry about that, Tyler. Call me on my shit. So if I'm up here and I say something, and you're like, you're lying, that's not true, you can do that. Or give me a thumbs up if you're like, yeah, you're telling the truth. Not that I'm a liar. Okay. I don't know how I get invited on these things sometimes. So the Youth Leaders Committee is also sort of a 2-pronged model. One is to sort of build or enhance education and awareness around the realities of youth homelessness. So as we know, there's like a lot of stigma and discrimination that youth face. And, my experience, it's pretty hard when a youth is talking about their experience to carry on with that stigma and discrimination. So, and who am I to stand in front of a group of whoever, and to talk about the experience of youth homelessness. I've not had that experience. So it's really important to have young people talking about that experience and to share the realities of that. But the really great thing about the Youth Leaders Committee is that they're also there to be informants and advisors about solutions to youth homelessness. So again, who are we to do this work and make decisions and be informing without engaging youth in that process? So they're a really powerful voice, informing on all sorts of issues, topics related to youth homelessness or housing issues. And so we leverage from their experience and have them inform on that. And I feel like in the work that I do, I think I try to focus on that piece more and try to engage youth more from that lens of being informants and advisors and working and really try to come from a place of that, they're dispelling some of the power between the youth that I work with, recognizing I do carry power, but that, I couldn't do this work without them. And so it's paramount to the work that I do that I walk alongside them and learn from them and that we do this work together. So I'm getting... Okay. And maybe just to back up, so the SYPC, the youth committee that we work with, initially actually started out with, I'm trying not to get too much in the history right now, but it is important, context person right here. So the SYPC initiated, in partnership with the organization I work for, the Social Planning and Research Council, a community-based research project and community plan project back in 2005. And with the funding that they had, did that research and established a youth committee to initially be a part of the research, but the more cool thing was to have youth advisory to be there as a part of the implementation of the recommendations that came out of the plan, so that it was informed and advised by youth, all these different recommendations that came to be. And then since that time, we've continued to work with the youth committee. Oh, great. So I think I'm kind of getting into like the mechanics of things in this slide a little bit, like how does it work? So I bullet point vomited on this slide, I apologize. Just to give you a taste for what we do, this is kind of how we're doing things. If you have other ideas of how we should be doing things, tell me about that, please. So starting at the top, I think it's really important to establish like what is the role of this particular group, and thinking about the context that you're working from within and what kind of roles might best help you and might best work for the youth. So with the Youth Leaders Committee, they are considered like educators, advisors, informants, and advocates. So we're pretty clear on that. So that's kind of a really important thing that I think, anyway, to think about when you're starting off working with young people. And then being clear about, like, what is my role in all of this? And so as a coordinator, it's supporting the committee to do their work, helping to facilitate or maybe co-facilitate sometimes, being a liaison, so liaising maybe between different community partners or other sort of youth advocates or stakeholders, and then being sort of a resource or informant, so bringing maybe relevant information to the committee to keep them informed in the work that they're doing. Then the other piece you want to think about is finding the right structure. I think you need to do this with the youth. So again, sort of the mechanics of like how often do we meet, where do we meet, co-chairing. So we're trying to establish sort of a co-chairing model and supporting them to do that co-chairing, and then we also do guidelines. I'm trying to think what's the word we use. Group guidelines. So we set up some group guidelines as a group and talk about like how do we work together in this group. So that's been really helpful. I think you need to have some resources to do this work, to do it right personally. So things like, having dedicated staff who it's like their role to work and engage with the youth. It's not something that I would not recommend that you don't have some good resources. And then honoring the youth work. I put honorariums, cash. Cash is king. And so we should be honoring the youth work and compensating them for their time as I'm getting when I'm sitting in that meeting. They should be getting paid for that work too. So we also provide bus tickets and food. And then the last one is something that I think is really important, is recognizing that, youth are still developing. They're still learning personally, professionally, and to include that as a part of the work that you're doing. And so asking them things like, what kind of skills do you want to learn? And so we've done stuff in the past where we've developed sort of professional development workshops around like, public speaking or like facilitating groups. Students are great for that kind of stuff. And then using your own sort of privilege and your position in terms of leveraging the work that they're doing. So maybe connecting them with the right people and the right contacts in terms of the work that they're doing. So that's just some of the mechanics of the way that the YLC works and things to think about. So, and then I like to put this slide in because it's fun. And this is actually from a former youth who used to work on the committee with us. She referred to the SPRC, so kind of me and the role that I do as being like a pit crew, and sort of thinking of the analogy of like NASCAR racers, if I hope I'm using the right language around that kind of thing. So, like if the car is the community, or in this case, maybe like the youth committee, this is an adaptable analogy, and the pit crew being like me, like I'm not going and like feeding Gatorade to the youth and like pumping up their car tires, but I'm there to like help, provide them with the things, the resources that they need to support them to stay on the right track, and to get them to where they're going and to meet their goals. So, kind of like whatever that takes, it can be all sorts of different things. So, it's helpful to have that role, I guess, is what I'm offering there. So, okay, and then now I'm just going to show you a bunch of like pictures because the youth are the stars of this work. Shut up, Erica. So, so does that look familiar? That's you. So this is a really great opportunity that somebody had, and so this is some of the like advocating role, and so my role in here was supporting somebody to do a delegation at City Council at Emergency and Community Services, and Hamilton, our mayor, put forth a recommendation to allocate $50 million towards some sort of a poverty reduction strategy, and they released this report, and so the youth got together on the committee. We looked over the report together during one of our monthly meetings, and we talked about like what do you like about what they're recommending here? What about these strategies? And then so the youth kind of created these points that they wanted to be shared at City Council, and then Tyler and I met and we worked together and drafted a delegation speech. And then he was a friggin' rock star and did his thing in front of City Councilor, which is I think was a really great experience. And so it was really important to have the youth voice in that sort of very important issue happening in our community. So that's one. This one is so some of the other work that we do, so some of the work that we're currently doing is. Maybe I'll just say this now. So one of the really helpful things in terms of the youth committee work I found is having some sort of a plan, giving the youth some goals that they identify that they want to work towards. So this was a picture taken in a like work plan brainstorming session where we were talking about, what do we want to do? We've got like, let's say in a year we want to accomplish something. What do you want it to look like? And so the committee identified the interest to have more youth voice at City Council and have more youth voice on issues at City Council. And so this was us brainstorming, like, what kind of issues do you want to look to? And then now we kind of have this plan that we look to, and so every meeting it's kind of organized around that plan. So right now, we're looking at landlord licensing as an issue. And so in our last meeting, I think it was our last meeting, sorry, I'm looking at Tyler because you're helping me jog my memory right now. Our last meeting, I brought in a lawyer from the local Hamilton Community Legal Clinic to talk more about landlord licensing as an issue, because I think the committee identified we think we need to be more informed about this issue before we go out publicly talking about this issue to make sure that we're well-rounded about that. So, and then in our next meeting, we're gonna then figure out where do we go from here. So we're more informed, we have more information, like what is our stance on this issue and what is our plan moving forward? Are we gonna do another delegation at City Council or who knows? This was the power of Twitter. So a couple years ago, the Ministry of Housing put out this call that they wanted to host youth labs. Does this sound vaguely familiar to anyone? Youth labs in communities across Ontario, where they would come and talk to young people with lived experience about solutions to youth homelessness. And so I grabbed a hold of that opportunity. This is another thing I do. You find opportunities that you think the youth might be interested in based on what you know about them, and you just friggin' like you run with it. And so I sent a tweet to the Minister of Housing at that time, and I was like, come to Hamilton! And then so we got the youth hooked up into this opportunity, which was pretty cool. And so that's them and meeting one of the youth labs there. So, and in this one, actually, it was members of the youth committee, but we needed more youth, so we invited more youth to come out and participate in that process. So, this was, again, advocating on the issues of youth housing and homelessness related to the youth labs. So this is, again, Tyler advocating on affordable housing, and I can't remember some of the other issues that you talked about, but and just the process of that, again, was connecting and meeting and coming up with some points together so that he felt prepared and ready to go up and present. And he was pretty badass up there. And yeah, so that was another one. So, Katie's in there too. It's master moderator. And then this one, is Gail in the room right now? No, Gail's not in the room. Okay, here's a good plug for youth engagement. If you're like I said before, you need resources. The Home Depot Canada Foundation. You need to check out the Orange Door Awards because they give $25,000 towards youth engagement. So if you're like, resources, we don't got that kind of stuff, there's your plug. And the application's not that bad. And one of the awesome things about that is that they engage young people in the process of winning those awards. So if anyone in this room has won an Orange Door Awards before, this is them in action, selecting the winners. So that's some of the other neat work that we've done in the past there. It's a pretty hard process. They're all very hard at work there right now, I will advocate for. This is my last slide, I think. So just generally, I just thought I would share some of the things that I've learned over the 7 years that I've been doing this work now. So the first thing is that you really do need, you're making a commitment to doing youth engagement work, and so and that includes the resources and ensuring that the meaningful part is that you're allowing for that space for youth to have their voice and not just disregarding, when they come forward with ideas and suggestions and solutions, that you're not just like, yeah, well, we can't do that because XYZ. And so the SYPC, we've had this conversation before about, I'm being very honest right now, we've had this conversation before about, it does, because it takes resources. We've talked about, the youth engagement piece and what could that or what should that look like. Should we have this ongoing youth committee? And but they always come back and say, absolutely, yes, we can't do this work without them. We'll make it work in terms of the resources that we need. So actually, we use the Home Depot funding as our resource for youth engagement work. Up front, you need to clarify expectations so the youth really know what they're getting into. And so I'll say things so my process for connecting with young people is we have this pre-interview meeting thing. And I'll tell them, you're here to work, you're here to contribute. And I'm going to help you as much as you need help, but this is, you're up to task for this. So just being clear about that and other expectations too, but just so the youth know exactly what they're walking into. I already talked about this, but the importance of dedicated staff role, but that staff role is there to not just come to the meetings and organize things, but also you need to be able to build rapport. So just thinking about that as well. Someone who I think someone has to come, I don't know, I feel like I'm testing myself now. They have to be youth friendly. I hope I'm youth friendly. And you're not like, oh, I hate you. So I have still another analogy from a former coworker, creating an environment of high flexibility with high expectations, but high support. So it's kind of, the high expectations, high support is the really key piece is expecting a lot out of the young people, but not go it alone and figure it out yourself. It's we'll walk through this together, which I think is super important. Creating a plan, but not a unsurmountable plan, because youth are really attracted to accomplishment and achievement, right? So this year it was one goal. We have one goal. What is it going to be? Let's do it. And and then having that conversation with a frame of and what can you actually accomplish? So I think we're at a good, I feel like we're kind of at a good space with our goals this year. We're making progress.
Yeah, I think getting informed to start is a great place
Yeah, yeah, okay. And allowing for flexibility, you know, like stuff comes up and pops up all the time that might be really interesting to the youth, so allowing space for that to happen as well. The third from the bottom, preparing for when things go wrong or when, you know, the expectations that maybe they have aren't met. So I kind of give this example once of quite a few years ago and a different collaborative, a young parent collaborative that I used to work with, a young woman who was also on the Youth Homelessness Committee, she's like, yeah, like I've been on this committee for like 2 years now, and like youth homelessness is still a thing. WTF? And I'm like, fuck, we failed the youth and their expectations. But I think it's just, you know, part of that is just being transparent and having those conversations with youth. And then things too, like, so when Tyler went to City Council about the mayor's poverty strategy, and, you know, obviously we're plugging youth stuff in there, and there wasn't youth stuff per se in the strategy. It's like, we're going to talk about this stuff and advocate it. It's not like the mayor's going to turn around and be like, okay, let's donate all $50 million to the youth. So just having those honest conversations so that the youth aren't like annoyed, let down. So that's something to think about too. Ensuring they have the skills to succeed. So, you know, again, checking, and a lot of these things you just got to ask the youth, like, what skills do you need to learn? How do I help you find that out? And then setting up a platform for that to have. So sometimes we've had we meet monthly. Sometimes in the past we'll have a meeting that's just a workshop on, like, as I was saying, like public speaking. And then this last one, you need to like really check your own bias and make sure that you really are giving space for the youth. And sometimes it's like, you know, they might be like talking about stuff and I'm like, ooh, but it's like, shut up, Erica, this isn't your space, like back off. And so you really need, and that's, I guess, part of the being committed to the youth voice and youth engagement, and having to advocate. So like when I go to other tables too, and I'm like, the youth are talking about this, and they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, the youth are talking about this, and so we're gonna talk about it too. I don't talk like that, but like, just really advocating for the youth, and then checking your own self, like in terms of, you know, making sure that you're giving the youth the space for their voice. So I have lots of opportunities like now to talk about, you know, youth stuff, but the meetings, those are for the youth, and like, I'm kind of hands off at that point. So, I'm good, yeah, thanks. So, but as I said, like, this is just a snapshot of the work, you know, that I have been doing, but I'm curious to hear what other folks are doing, or if you heard something and you're like, that sounds really bad, tell me, because it's all about development and growth and progress. And yeah, thanks everyone. Yay.
Thank you so much, Erica. And also thank you for the concrete pieces. Like, I think it's so helpful to have very concrete ideas of, hey, we did this and this strategy worked. And I think a lot of this is we have the concept, but to be able to make that a real thing is a totally different piece. So thank you. Next up, we have Aya, and Aya Fauzi. I actually had the privilege of working with her this past year. So Aya is completing her Master's of Design at Carleton University, and she's done research with Away Home Ottawa and the University of Ottawa, exploring experience of homelessness in marginalized groups. So that's the Building Bridges study that Jackie actually mentioned at the beginning. She worked with Heart, an organization exploring artists and their experience creating artwork. Aya currently works at the Ottawa Hospital in the Center for Practice Change Research, exploring perceptions around implementing technology. Her interests are in ethical design for behavioral change and understanding complex systems. And I just have, working together, we had so many great conversations about how to use technology for good. And I think it's amazing the questions that she had just in wanting to think along those lines. So anyways, do you want this mic or that mic? That mic? All right, take it away.
This is it? Okay. Hey everyone. So I'm Aya. I was doing some research with Katie and Jacqueline around newcomer youth and some of the problems they face in terms of being homeless. And what I quickly discovered was that I couldn't really use that word to really meaningfully engage them. And so I was on the bus today and I was thinking about meaningfully engaging youth and what that would mean. So I decided to search the etymology of the word mean. And I found mean started in the 12th century and it meant held in common, change and exchange. And that was really interesting because I realized that the word homelessness isn't a word that is ever changed and exchanged between cultures that are needing to get help for that and the service providers that have the help for that. And that creates a really big problem because it means that someone said something really interesting today actually in our group discussion. They said, like, if I'm McDonald's and you come to me asking for like Harvey's, then I won't know what to do. Like, I won't have that service to you. Like, so how did he explain it? It was like McDonald's can serve burgers, but if you come to me asking for McDonald's, I'm not going to know what to do. I have no experience serving burgers. I wouldn't be able to prepare it. I have no use for it. So it's the same kind of situation where newcomer youth wouldn't even know where to ask for like homelessness services because they don't have that word in their language. There's shame associated with even talking about not having a home. There's a lot of stigma around needing a home, like especially if you're with your parents and they have a lot of services to like help you and to stay involved. But if you associate with, say, being gay or of another culture or a different religion, then there's definitely there's no really place for you to go. And then as I was exploring the word meaning more, I found the statement, you know what I mean. And I think we use that a lot. Like, you know what I mean. You know what I'm talking about. So that was started in 1834. And I was thinking about how, as I was researching, I guess the biggest part of my research happened more when I would just talk to people who were newcomers and they would say, oh, like, no, like I have a place to live, you know, like I stay with my aunt or I'm sleeping on my friend's couch or, yeah, no, I could never leave my parents' house, never. So yeah, I stay there and it kind of sucks. And so that was like really, you know what I mean kind of statement was kind of synonymous with this, like, we actually have no idea what you mean. Like, if you were to ask somebody, are you homeless? And they are homeless, of that population, they would never really answer yes, ever. And so at the end of the day, there's kind of this problem of like translation of the meaning of the word. And so if we think about like our language and where the word homelessness is situated and all these problems that surround being homeless in our language and how we talk about it, the location of that in another language and in another culture is completely different. And it definitely, we wouldn't find the same factors around the word homelessness in our language or culture that we would find around the word homelessness in someone else's language or culture. Therefore, there needs to be some sort of understanding of all of these individual aspects, and we'd have to remap them onto like another culture. So if you can imagine like the map of our language and where homelessness exists, and the map of someone else's language, homelessness doesn't exist in the same spot. It's not comparable. And that's like a really, really huge issue because that's the words we're using, that's what we're calling out for. And on top of like maybe a language barrier, it's like a cultural barrier to not be able to ask for help because it's just so shamed or so like stigmatized for that culture. And that's like a huge thing to break. Like, to talk to my friends, I remember like having a friend and being like, why don't you just move? Like, you can support yourself, you can do this. And it was just like, but my family, and then dropping them, and like you losing that whole like support. So I was kind of really sad, and I remember like breaking out in tears kind of near the end of our research, being like, oh my God, there was nothing really I contributed other than to understanding just like how far we have to contribute in order to help newcomer youth, especially newcomer youth who are dealing with homelessness, dare I say, where it means something totally different for them. So there's a lot of work to be done there, and I think it'll start by really disarming ourselves from like the way we use it and coming over to understand where like the aspects of how we use it are existing in other places, and it's going to be different for every different subculture, from Philippines to Arabic, and then depending on like the religious layer and cultural layers and language layers. So yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents.
Thank you so much, Aya. And I think that, I mean, I can't really add to that other than just it makes us think so much bigger about this whole challenge, and meeting people where they're at becomes a completely different thing. It's not just, you know, a group of people, it's each individual and understanding what that means. So thank you. Next up, we have Dr. Kath Larkins. So Dr. Larkins is director of the Centre for Children's and Young People's Participation at the University of Central Lancashire. And Kath has worked with marginalized children and young people for over 20 years, using co-research with children and young people across Europe to challenge discrimination and to improve services. She writes on citizenship theory and participation, and she chairs Eurochild's advisory group on participatory methods of involving children and young people in vulnerable situations, and is co-convener of the European Sociological Association Childhood Network. Welcome.
And I'm actually going to sit down because I realise if I stand here, I probably can't read what I've written. So, but thank you for welcoming me. I was asked to come and talk about homelessness and engaging people meaningfully in that. And I thought, I don't really work with young people who identify as homeless. But having heard what you just said there, it really resonates, because the young people I work with were absolutely affected by housing issues, but they wouldn't name it as such. So picking up on that idea and moving gently this way. I'm also going to pick up on the idea of meaningful participation, what that word meaningful means, because I take my understanding of it from somebody called Ruth Sinclair, and she talked about meaningful engagement being a rolling process rather than a one-off event, and a rolling process that leads to impact and change. And so I thought, well, what I'll talk about today is I'll talk about trying to achieve impact and change, because if in anything that we do, if it doesn't take things forward, then we need to keep going on much longer. So, and we come to those situations where 2 years later, people are still homeless. Okay, so flicking through the slides. Does anybody know who that is at the bottom there? Yay! Wayne Rooney. Okay, and somebody seeing that said, this means that you're from England. Yeah. Well, I work in England, but I live in Wales. But Wayne Rooney plays football somewhere near where I work. And he's also from a traveller family. Okay. So a lot of my work is with Gypsy, Roma, and traveller families. And not many people know that he is. And not many people are necessarily naming their identity as Gypsy, Roma, or traveller. I don't know, have you come across people who name themselves as that? No. Yeah, Roma. Yeah, okay. And the term Roma is often used instead of using Gypsy, Roma, and traveller, because the term Roma is meant to include the diversity of ethnicities, which are linked together by some common features of lifestyle, but not necessarily ethnicity. But in the UK, people tend to prefer to use the terms traveller, Gypsy, and Roma. So that's what I'll use. I could tell you stories from 2 research projects, which were co-led by Gypsy, Roma, and traveller young people. And I don't know how long you want me to talk for, but you'll give me a 5-minute warning. So, oh, that's really helpful. So, okay. I'll talk through a story for 5 minutes, and then I'll talk through some of the lessons that I've been learning from that story and from other stories. And when I try to learn lessons, you'll know from, if you went to the workshop I co-convened earlier, I learn by listening. And recently I've been listening to young people who are involved in engagement and participation actions for social change across Europe. And the lessons that I'll tell you are what they're starting to learn and what they're checking out with other people. And I'd like your feedback about that if you have time. Okay, so this first research project called Travellers and Gypsies, Generations for the Future. There we are. It took place quite a few years ago, and it involved 5 co-researchers. And their names are at the bottom of that report. I don't know if you can see them. Babe, Patrick, Nicole. I can't read them either. But I know some of those young people still, because those young people were involved in this project, and they continue to inform the work that led to the second project that I'll talk about later. So there were 5 people leading this co-research, and they responded to an invitation from the government, which was about a consultation. And the government wanted to know what was going to be in the best interests of gypsies and travellers to improve their strategy for them in the future. And we involved a lot of people. In fact, it was 10% of the population. And we involved them in face-to-face forums in environments like this. But also we went out to unauthorised sites where people were living by the side of the road, and we gave them cameras and we asked them what they wanted to show us. So we asked them a lot of other things that weren't to do with housing, and I'm only going to talk to you about the housing things, really. But the sorts of things they talked about were about being moved on, getting towed away, having no facilities, no toilets, issues that you will perhaps have come across in communities that you work with, people having stones thrown at them. And besides the issues that were directly happening to them because they're homeless, there were issues of how they were being represented in the media and the press. And they took photos or they drew pictures of the kind of conditions that they were living in. So even on official sites, the top picture is the shower tray that people were expected to stand in. And if anybody who knows those cultures knows the importance of cleanliness to those cultures. And this is the shower tray after the girls said they'd been working on it for 3 hours to make it look better. And this was an official council, municipal provided site. And on another official provided site, the bottom picture is of a picture a 5-year-old drew of a rat that her dad caught. And a number of people talked about rats coming into their trailers where they were living. So there's inadequate conditions, but also inadequate provision. So around half the number of slabs, which is where you would put a trailer for the people who live in trailers. Now, not all people who are Gypsy, Roma and Traveller live in trailers or want to live in trailers. About 20% of the population do. And at the time, it was going to take about 17 years to meet the shortfall in provision of sites, just in the physical spaces, and also there was a lot of work to be done to improve the conditions on those. So we gave that evidence to the government, and the government said, yeah, all right, okay, we'll give you more money. And in fact, I didn't meet anyone from the government. I didn't tell them. The 5 co-researchers went and met with the minister and showed him the pictures and told him the story and showed him the report. And they didn't do it on their own. There were other people, there were adults involved. But it was the biggest consultation was with youth compared to other communities. So they got these offers of more money, promises for the years to come of millions of pounds. And then in the 2 years that followed, in the 22 municipalities that were across Wales, only one asked for that money. And when they asked for it, they didn't ask for it in a way that was actually anything that met the criteria. So even though there was free money on offer from the government, nobody wanted it because nobody wanted to create more sites in their municipalities, because nobody wanted the planning issues, the neighbour issues, and they were all tending to kind of pander to the media images that stigmatise that community. So the government said, okay, we'll do more. We'll make it an absolute duty to provide and to assess need. And so they created another law, which is the 2014 Act. And they did lots of guidance, and there's great guidance now about how to create sites and co-produce them with communities. Are we making any progress? Well, yeah, actually some. But where are we now? We're 2018. That was 8 years ago. The march forward is slow, you know. And this is in a context where there was evidence and there was support from the government. But things were moving in the right direction. In Wales now, there has been a big commitment to a further round of £10 million specifically designated to reduce youth homelessness. So that's the context, okay. We're moving forward. And instead of 17 years to meet the shortfall, we're talking about, what does it say there? About 10 years now, okay. So moving forward, maybe at twice the speed we were. So somebody talked earlier about the long arc of history, you know, tending to move towards justice. I don't know if any of you have heard that expression before. Martin Luther King said it. And I kind of wish that the long arc of history was as simple an arc as that. In my experience, it tends to look much more like this, you know. And to keep things on track, we need to keep doing things, you know. We need to keep applying pressure to move it in the right direction so that it does tend towards justice. You know. And we need to know what those points are. You know, how do we apply those pressures? You know, what works to create impact and change? So with a group of young people who are from a variety of marginalised communities across Europe, I'm developing some work at the moment to try to identify those. And this is their list. Having goals, things that you want to change, okay, that are clear. And when you make a clear link between young people's goals and start from their perspective and link them up to policy, then that's really effective. Of course, young people can answer consultations, but very often those consultations don't address the questions and their goals, the things they want to talk about. But you can do it anyway. Because in the consultation that we did, which I've told you the results around housing, the young people also wanted to talk about the police, and the government hadn't asked them anything about the police. But we did it anyway. You know. So all the time we have to juggle, don't we, about whose agendas we're following and where we can combine both and reconcile them. Then that's really useful. And a lot of that is about putting our own agendas on one side or reconciling our own organisational agendas with the goals of young people so that we find a common thing that we're aiming for. But when youth choose their own goals, then their enthusiasm and their knowledge leads to an energy and a motivation that actually helps things change like nothing else does. So that's our first point of pressure. Advocacy, having a really good plan, you know, and knowing how to communicate. And that's about youth having those understandings, but about group leaders having those understandings as well. And we have a responsibility to make sure we get informed so that we can pass that information on to others. Young people have often learned from the experience of others as well. You know. And that peer-to-peer approach, I think, is incredibly helpful. Part of advocacy is about communication plan, and on the first day, people were talking about changing public opinion, and getting the media involved in that is incredibly helpful. And we have, over time, built relationships with people like the BBC, so that they now invite traveller youth on to talk about their issues. And recently, some of them made a video about education. And presented that. But also young people themselves, the power of Twitter, as you just said, you know, using that, using everything we've got. Another pressure point. Okay, so advocacy. Evidence. And I guess, as a researcher, the evidence bit is a lot of what I can sometimes help with. And it makes you have to think about it. What is evidence? Because sometimes the most powerful evidence is when young people talk about their personal experiences and they tell their stories, and that has an emotional impact on people. But some people respond to that by kind of doing this. Because some people are feeling defensive and it doesn't meet their organisational agenda. So we have to understand what their trigger points are, what kind of evidence it is that will work for them, and give it to them in that form, you know. So give them statistics if that's what they want, you know. Give them art if that's what they respond to, you know. But think about who your audience is when you're collecting and delivering your evidence. And, you know, sometimes videos are incredibly powerful because they travel where young people can't always do so. Another pressure point. Inside connections. Knowing people who know people who know people who can do it, you know. Sometimes we act as if we just give the right kind of evidence, then that's enough, it will speak to it for itself. But getting people, recruiting people on side, politicians, policymakers, but also bringing the head of your service, if you're trying to affect your service, in to meet the young people's group in their own setting. Those personal relationships, the evidence from research shows it's when those personal face-to-face relationships start to really build, that's when shift really happens. And sometimes in order for those personal relationships to build, then it helps to have groups of young people who are targeted to as a kind of parallel group working alongside or working collaboratively with people in a certain amount of power. Okay. And I think, hopefully, that there's two more, okay? One is the context you're working with. We talked on the first day, which is about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, issues around homelessness having been brought to the fore recently. They're nothing when they're abstract principles, but when they're used as leverage, that's incredibly powerful. And you can, that's a big part of what happened in Wales, just to let you know. We had somebody from the UN come and visit some of the sites. Giving money to youth themselves, you know, but building alliances between youth, because when participation groups happen, like you might have youth councils, which absolutely don't include the young people that you're working with. But in some countries where we've worked, young people have built a bridge into political arenas by working through the youth political arenas first, you know, and they've been much more open. And then finally working together with other people. I don't know if you all know who that is. In Wales, kind of people know him. His name's Michael Sheen. He's a celebrity, okay? So he was in Twilight. He has championed the youth homelessness movement in Wales, and that's been incredibly helpful. You know? But there's something about linking not just with those personalities, but linking with people's communities that's been very helpful as well. I'm not going to talk in detail about all of those points, because there's lots of things to say. But I also wanted to talk one last message, okay, which is about everything I've said there is about focusing on the big level of influencing public decision-making. But power comes in all sorts of ways, and it comes through that internal sense of developing a sense of yourself, having a meaningful role where you feel that you can invest yourself as an individual. And also, none of the other elements of engaging with politicians can happen if you haven't got those two things first. So every way that we meaningfully engage is important, and all of that is a pressure point towards the long arc of history moving in the right direction. I'll stop.
Thank you so much, Kath, and thank you for that last point especially, just that everything we're doing is building on what has happened before. I think we have to remember that in this work. It's long and slow, but when I think even 2-3 years ago, the shift at this conference from some of the things that even a few conferences ago, it's really interesting to see how much we've shifted in how we think about meaningfully engaging youth. And I would say there's more youth in this room who are paid to be here today than other times that I've been in conferences like this. So that's really exciting. But we need more. So we only have a few minutes, probably about 10 minutes left, but I would love to open it up for some burning questions, ideas, comments from the audience. So does anybody have anything that they've been wanting to ask the panelists? Trading strategies. I've got a question. Nobody else does? I'm really curious. I think this has been a really interesting panel in my mind, just in terms of, oh, nope, go for it. Yep, yeah. Suspense for my question. Okay.
Sorry. You said, Sheldon, that you asked the young lady not to become a former, if I got it right, a former or youth at risk, 30 years old. So how do you think, to all of you, when you want some long-term or mid-term involvement, engagement of youth, how do you manage to do that without entrenching them into a world that they might want to move out from? I'm not clear, but it's the end of the day. Sorry.
Sure, it's all right, Cecile, and perhaps over a drink later, you and I will really talk about it all. I think for me, it was really about an epiphany after years of working, still much to learn, is realizing all the benefits that were accruing from this young woman's brilliance and talent and experiences were accruing to other people. And it was really me figuring out and saying to her, make sure you get something out of this experience, right? And that you aren't left at 30 years old and you didn't get the benefits of all of these experiences and what we actually have a responsibility to be offering you so you can actually take those experiences on and you know, your life can proceed in the way it actually should. So that's what it was for me. And I think it means ensuring that we look for every opportunity to accelerate the path that young people can achieve. Right? And we do it through traditional methods, which starts at our outreach program. We do all of this, and all of a sudden it opened up another path. Oh, youth engagement as a tool to teach young people skills and abilities and confidence and empowerment, regardless of what they're talking about. That's what it became, another opportunity to help young people grow, in addition to the value of what young people had to say. So we were missing all the other benefits because we were thinking about it the wrong way. So I don't know if you want to add that.
I think maybe I'll, yeah, I agree a lot with what Sheldon was saying, and I think that in the work that I'm doing, it's also about hopefully bridging youth to other opportunities that they might not normally connect with, and whatever that might look like, and then also looking at I guess kind of looking at the youth holistically as not just a person, you know, sitting with you on your youth committee, but that they have these other goals that they want to attain, and that hopefully some of the work that you're doing with them is going to impact that, or maybe literally it is supporting them to reach some of those other goals. So, you know, providing a reference for youth, helping them to apply for, you know, a job or whatever, talking with them about, you know, that they're, you know, looking at post-secondary options. So looking at them holistically, I think that's maybe the point where I was saying about being mindful that youth are still developing, and you have to be mindful of that when you're engaging with them. So.
We provide young people with access to qualifications. We pay them for the work that they're involved in. And we also work with them to identify where they want to go to and try to get other resources in to help them meet those goals.
Anybody else right now? Any other questions? I am curious, actually. I think in the work that we've done with the Way Home Ottawa, there was often a conversation of what is the line between exploitation and empowerment. And so in terms of sharing one's story, and the boundaries around that and what is healthy, but also the expectation that young people are asked to share their story and that's their only contribution. I'm curious, and open this up to the room as well, about how people navigate that. And not being militant on either side of that, but how do you respectfully create space, but also create safe space for people?
That's actually become a big part of our conversation choices for youth. And we're reminded young people come to us for housing and support. They don't come to us to participate in research. They don't come to us to, it's like, but that's a big responsibility. The benefits that have come from, creating space for young people to use their voice and contribute, and they actually feel really good about that. It's balanced with, this is not what they came here for, right? And we have to respect the balancing act that's required. Media requests is probably one of the easiest ones. We get inundated all the time with media requests. And, oh, can you find me a young person in 3 hours because I have to meet a deadline? No, I can't. But through creating a structure, which is a youth leadership council, I'm always struggling with that because who am I to decide whether or not a young person wants to do a media interview? So balancing that is by creating actually a permanent structure, and I think you referenced it's actually the meaningful part means you're investing in this for the long term. And it becomes not a nice-to-have thing over here that's on the corner of someone's desk. It actually becomes front and center, and you actually need to commit organizational resources to do it properly and so on. So we're actually doing some work right now to create a research evaluation agenda for the organization for the first time. And it's really like a strategic plan for how do we determine what research and evaluation we want to participate in, whether it's initiated by a request from the outside or even just, what we're not seeing enough research happening in this area, so how do we inspire that research? But part of it has then triggered a whole conversation around maybe we actually should have some organizational ethical guidelines of our own about how we work with researchers. And here's our bar, and here's our standard, reflecting the responsibility we have in the lives of young people, and how do we then put that out there for the research community, for example, so that we can actually enter into that partnership and young people are part of creating that in a much healthier way. And you're right, we weren't having these conversations 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. So I think for us, it's becoming a much bigger conversation. I'm also realizing, and I'll just stop here, is that young people trust me, for example. That's a lot of responsibility as well, right? Because if I ask a young person to do something based on the relationship that me and my staff have with that young person, they're likely to say yes. We've also had multiple experiences where in the moment young people say yes, and it could be a week later, 2 weeks later, 6 months later, they are in full-blown panic mode because they've put their story out in a way that they can't take back. So there's a lot of considerations. But it's not also at the same time me figuring all that out for young people. We have to partner with young people to figure that out together.
That's a good question. My tired, introverted brain, what is my response? I think that's actually why there's been, in the work that I do, a bit more of a shift to focusing on youth not being engaged in terms of telling their story, but more in talking about the issues and talking about the solutions and doing other sort of engagement work. So versus when I feel like when I first started in the role, it was a lot about telling stories and then realizing, is that really the best way to engage and connect with young people? So having said that, for sure, there's going to be opportunities that come up where it's about partly telling your story, but my approach has been to talk with the youth and give them the option of whether or not they want to do that and to what extent they want to do that or not. So there's some support and planning around how much you want to engage. But if the youth doesn't want to, in terms of sort of joining the committee, there's no expectation that you will go out to, XYZ events and tell your story in front of a bunch of people, because that's not cool. And I feel like I was working with some of these young people for a couple of years. I feel like there's a lot of stuff about their stories I don't even know. So I feel like coming from that view of you're here to engage with me in this work and talk about the issues and the solutions and the gaps and all that kind of stuff is really what the focus is. And I think the youth really like that a lot more. The sense that I get is they want to talk about, this really is a crappy way to support youth, and this is what we should be doing, is a really more youth-friendly way, I think, to do this work. So, yeah.
I guess I would say, like, coming from like an individual experience perspective, it would be about like empowering the youth from like their perspective and not creating like a victim culture. I think it's also up to that individual to understand where they're at in terms of like telling their story. Like, there's a lot of emotions involved, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done to kind of like accept your past, accept where you are, and accept where you're going. And until you kind of make peace with that, it becomes like a different maturity of a story that you'll tell. So I think it's also about communicating, I guess, with the youth about where they're at, and like making sure you understand where they're at in order to like make sure that it's not something that is premature to do and is meeting them at the stage where they feel like they're able to tell a story with perspective versus telling a story that they're kind of still in the middle of.
Go ahead.
What we tend to do is to ask young people what they want to work on and then work on that. It's not always what you would call research. You know, sometimes what they want to do is get more involved in their community and go to a concert and visit some museums, and so that's what they do. You know. That way they're in charge, and we're giving them the resources.
If I can just add one thing to that, like we started thinking about, I don't have a full answer on this, but we actually started thinking about differently in terms of the conversation we're having with the young people is thinking about it differently in terms of, you know, really it's about using, you know, the elements of your story, your experiences, to whatever degree you want to share that, that's an individual choice, but it really becomes about how to interpret that in terms of what it actually means for, say, you know, these other 10 young people over here. So it's actually talking and using your story and the power of your story and the experience to actually translate it into, here's the things I'm advocating for based on my story. So I think there's a lot of room to actually begin thinking somewhat differently about what is actually the goal here in doing that. Recognizing it really is still an individual choice of in what way they talk about their story. But I think that's, for us at least, proven to be a much more empowering experience for young people, where they actually, have much more control of how and when and for what purpose they use their story. Because it really is about what this now means for, we want to change systems, we want to change programs, we want to do better in terms of the next 100 young people who walk through our door, how to do that translation.
Thank you for those answers. And I think just that need to be responsible with how we navigate that in partnership with young people. Thank you to all of you. You brought really different perspectives. Oh, one more question. Okay, we're right at time, so go quick, but let's go. One more.
Like you mentioned previous conferences, so has homelessness decreased in general?
Is that my question?
The other part of the question is, are there efforts into stopping, if you can, like I don't know how you could do it, like stopping homelessness from happening, or?
I think we're at time, but certain communities, yes, we have seen decreases in homelessness in certain populations, but I think it's hit and miss, and there are prevention efforts, and you should talk to Sean.
I'm just going to say one thing really quick. There is a big shift in this country around early identification and prevention. I think the federal government's going to take a major step in that direction in its next plan. Certainly, that's going to be a huge benefit to those of us who work specifically youth, and in my case also vulnerable families. The earlier we get to some of this stuff, we can prevent it from happening. So you are going to see a big shift in this country around prevention, early identification.
But way to hit us with a whammy on the way out. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for our panel.
Another hour.